Hello and welcome to another episode of the Alpha Movement podcast. Today I'm joined by Paul Webb, who is an ex-professional football player, a very high-end personal trainer, and like more than that, he kind of, when I set out to do this podcast, I set out to define what it means to be alpha. And to be honest, I think Paul embodies that pretty well. And in this extremely wide-ranging conversation, as you'll hear, we discuss so much from the very practical aspects of strength to kind of his rituals and his routines that lead him up to success, to mindset, to even the origins of the universe. So please listen to this episode and head over to alphamovement.co to find out more about the podcast. So welcome to the show, Paul. How are you doing today?
I'm very, very well, Tom. Delighted to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Good. Let's start off with, who is Paul Webb?
Paul Webb is a guy who always has to pinch himself to wonder if it's all true or not. He's a guy who, when he was a little boy, was obsessed with being a footballer, to the degree that that's all I did. I walked around with a football under my arms. Bear in mind, I'm a 70s child, so we didn't have the distractions that kids today, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to put it, have. So we just used to play football all the time. We used to meet up during, before, after school and kick a ball up against the wall, kick it up and down the street, all that sort of stuff. So I was obsessed with being a footballer. I was actually a goalkeeper, and I was really fortunate enough to finally sign a professional contract with Crystal Palace in the mid-80s and fulfill that boyhood dream. Unfortunately, it didn't last as long as I'd like it to, because I got injured, and the injury was so severe I had to stop playing after a year or two of trying to come back. So I became a guy who continuously tried to reinvent himself in many, many different ways.
Nice. I think we should start off with something you mentioned just then. You mentioned you're fortunate enough to become to get to a very high level. I'm guessing it wasn't just fortune. I'm guessing there was a lot of hard work and practice there. What did your kind of, on a structured level, what did the practice look like? And on an unstructured level, what did the practice look like as well?
Well, on an unstructured level, we just played football. What was interesting is I can tell you the exact time and day that I knew I was a goalkeeper. When we were in primary school. And this feels like yesterday, it's so surreal. We used to have a kid who was a year older than us, and his name was Simon, and he used to kick the ball really hard. And we used to call it Simon's hot shot, right? And I think it was about 7, 8, 9. And when the guys went in goal and he would hit the ball, everyone used to cower and cover and hope they didn't get hit by the ball. And I can remember facing him for the first time, and he hit this shot. And I just stood up and pushed it up and over the bar, because we had rudimentary goals in the playground. And I can distinctly remember, I think it was my friend Charlie shouting out, "Oh my God, he saved Simon's hot shot." And I thought to myself, okay, that wasn't too bad. I could probably do this. I quite like this. So from that moment on, I became obsessive about just playing football. And the unstructured training was just kicking a ball against the wall and catching it, throwing the ball up in the air and catching it, bouncing the ball and diving on it. You know, we didn't worry about tumbling on concrete or getting holes in trousers or anything like that. And that sort of took me quite a long way. It took me into the school football team, and I used to play for a couple of years above me because I could play at that level. I was big enough and strong enough and capable enough to play at that level. And from there, I then got spotted by the district. Then you had more structure. We'd go one night a week and train with them. And look, football was much different then. You know, the training you got as a young footballer playing for the district was just, okay, the forwards are going to have shots, you go and goal. There was no specific goalkeeping training like there is now. Football was very, very different, a completely different game. People used to pass it back to us, we used to pick it up. We didn't have to use our feet so much. You know, that didn't come until sort of about 88, 89, something like that. So that really was how it was, and until I got picked up as a schoolboy from Palace, and then used to go twice a week in the evening. I think that was on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And then we'd have more structure. We'd do a bit of fitness. We'd do a bit of circuit stuff. We'd do a bit of handling. We'd do a bit of catching practice. And then the old famous shot stopping. And then I had a little bit of a fortune, really, because I was invited to take a day off of school. Now, bear in mind, this is when I was studying for my exams, were O levels then, GCSEs now. And I was invited to have a day off from school and go training during the day with Crystal Palace properly. So that would be with the youth team, with the reserve team, with the first team at their Mitcham training ground. And I had to go to school. My dad had to come up, and the youth development officer at Crystal Palace, who was Peter Prentice, I think, back then, had to come up as well. We had to sit in front of the headmaster at school, and they had to tell him why they wanted me to go there. And we had to get special dispensation from the local authority to have one day off of school. And we picked a Thursday. I remember it's a Thursday because it was the day we had something like RE and then double games. So it wasn't too dramatic for me to have off. So I had the morning off and would go to the Palace training ground and play football. So that was when I was about 15. So you're kind of thinking then, okay, maybe I've got a chance of being an apprentice professional here, because I didn't know of any other kid around that was actually doing something like that at any football club. And that's kind of how it built into signing forms for Palace.
Nice. So are there any lessons that you particularly remember learning that have kind of helped you in like further on in life when you're training, whether it was, I don't know, a work ethic or something that particularly resonated to you, or even like any particular stories that just stand out to you?
He's my second cousin, really, was back in the 70s, was British powerlifting champion. And when I started doing the schoolboy football thing for Palace and that, my dad asked him if he'd write me a training program to help, get stronger, get more explosive, that kind of thing. And I remember him taking me to this gym. And the work ethic from these guys in there was just unbelievable. They were focused, they were driven, they had everything written down, all their reps, their load, what they were doing, how much rest they had, etc., etc. And when you used to talk to these guys, they were scary guys, big powerlifters, huge guys, way older than yourself. Lots of a real old school, a proper warehouse gym with sweat and sawdust and ammonia and that kind of thing. And these guys were all about planning. These guys were all about focused, diligent training, never missing a rep, always going, always hitting the numbers. And that got me thinking a lot more about the mentality of athletes. And I used to love that stuff as a kid. My thing was, what makes, Kevin Keegan a much better footballer than the average footballer, for instance. And it became apparent when I used to see the pros training at the training ground that there were some really good footballers, some really talented footballers, but they didn't take it as seriously as they could have done and could have been so much better. And then you had the footballer who was talent-wise probably average, but was so driven and so focused that they just went on and on and on and on and went on to greater things. And that really defined the difference between the good athlete and the elite athlete, that it's a mental thing as opposed to a technical thing, usually.
So what do you reckon defines that difference, or what do you reckon the beginnings of that is?
I like to think it's not being satisfied. I think we all have an innate desire to move forward, to develop. And I think in some cases we kind of fall foul of, I'm not as fortunate, I'm not as lucky, it's not gonna work for me for A, B, C reason, very fixed mindset reasons. But some people just don't seem to worry about that. Some people just do it no matter what. And it may well be that's a social thing. It may well be that it's a parental thing. It may be it's an individual thing. But there certainly is a difference mentally the further you go up. I don't believe that people are just get things handed to them on the plate. That as you go higher and higher and higher, you have to prove yourself more and more and more. And there's a bigger fall off if you don't. So with that in mind, I think a lot of it is an inner desire. A kind of, I know all about this epigenetics now, where the environment can shift and change the person and the individual and the mindset and help them develop and move forward. And I think there's a lot of that to be said. Some people just adapt to it better, some don't.
Okay. something that I'm curious about is pre-match rituals. I know a lot of high-level athletes have pre-match rituals. Like I think you'll appreciate this because you mentioned you're a Chelsea fan. John Terry using the same urinal each day at Stamford Bridge. Was there anything that?
And he uses the same shin pad since he was a schoolboy. I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, just rolled up textbooks.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
So, are there any pre-match rituals that you used to follow?
Yeah, I used to put my left boot on first and my left glove on first.
Yeah.
And I'm right-footed and right-handed, so don't ask me why.
And then what marks the end of the footballing? You've already mentioned it, but I think you can point it out.
I had an impact injury, so it was pre-season. I was training with the first team. I was messing around with we had decided to do some penalties. And back then, the ball that they used, it didn't move around like it did now. It was just a straight ball, and it would hit lightly as they hit it hard. So at some point, if the ball was coming to you, you would expect it to just drop a little bit. He blasted this penalty straight down the middle, and as I put my hands up to catch the ball, it just dipped onto the end of my thumb and effectively exploded the joint there, which meant I had to go and have it pinned probably for about 8 months. We had that taken out. Bit of rehab. It's funny because you don't think you've got much muscle in your hand, but after being immobilised for 8 months and they take the plaster off, it's like you've got nothing there. It's skeletal. It's just crazy. And then so you go through all the rehab stuff, and then you're back out playing football. The problem was, as soon as the ball hit the hand, the thumb would dislocate. It wasn't stable enough for that kind of impact. So unfortunately, that was it.
And what was the transition like out of that?
That was very difficult.
And how old are you then? Sorry,
I was 20.
Okay. That's very young then.
So very young. And remember that football had been my life up to then. It was the thing that I thought about morning, noon and night. And I'd got to where I wanted to get to. I was starting to really push hard. And then it was almost effectively taken away. Football was a very different game then, as I've said a couple of times. When you became injured as a footballer, you were just, that was it. We're sorry, we're not going to renew your contract. Thanks very much. Bye-bye. There was no kind of gentle letdown. There was no, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to sit with you. We're going to take you on a course. We're going to teach you some stuff so you can retrain. Or there was none of that at all. It was just, that's the end of it. Thank you very much. Goodbye. So it was quite brutal. And for a while I came out and you do what any ex-footballer does. You kind of punt around a little bit for a club and try and find another route back in. But I just couldn't do it. I just wasn't capable enough physically to play in goal. And I wasn't a good enough outfield player. So that was the end of that. So it became really, really difficult. And, I kind of felt I lost my identity a little bit. We give ourselves labels, rightly or wrongly. I don't think labelling yourself is a good thing anyway. But I was Paul the footballer. I had a small bit of celebrity. I liked that. It was very egotistical, but it felt good when, you had loads of kids coming up asking for your autograph when you went out shopping. And that was suddenly ripped away from me. And I just didn't know what to do. I really didn't. I remember having a conversation with my mum who said I should be a policeman, and that kind of didn't really help too much. And I tried a couple of jobs. I did a bit of sales. I did a bit of marketing. And I just couldn't really get on with it. So I was training hard because I really liked being in the gym, which was born off by training with those powerlifters a few years ago. So I kind of had this idea that actually, why don't I try and be a coach of some sort? And if I'm honest, I think back then, if there had been such a thing as a goalkeeping coach, I probably would have gone that route. But because there wasn't, and I didn't think I could be a football coach, I just thought I'd be a strength coach. I'll help people get strong and fit and explosive because that's the kind of training I like. Unfortunately, as we know, there wasn't really a strength industry back then. Yeah. So that was quite difficult. But that's kind of was my mentality at the time.
Did you think you were going to be working with athletes or with the kind of...
Right from the start, yeah. Right from the start. So you go and you do your internships, you do qualifications, you do whatever you need to do, and you have this idea in your head that this is going to be great. I'm going to come into the UK, I'm going to turn around, I'm going to say, I'm the UK strength coach, I'm the football expert, and the athletes are going to come roaring in saying, yep, I want some of that. And do you know what? Every single one of them I spoke with said, no, not for me, don't want to do that, don't want to go into the gym.
So what happened at that point then?
Well, I had to make some decisions very quickly because, at that time, I'd met someone, she was pregnant, baby on the way, bills to pay, lots of pressure. So just kind of thought, what's the best way I can use what skills I have and start to earn some money? So it was just personal training. The personal training industry was just really starting to get going. We're talking about early 90s, really. There weren't the big chain gyms around there are now. There weren't the personal training studios that were around now. So I just did it all off my own back. I started off in my dad's double garage. I bought a load of equipment. I put it all in there. I started with friends. I started with a couple of athletes I knew who were really friendly with me. And it just went from there. And that's how I started doing that.
Something I forgot to ask earlier is, where do you think the love for football came from? Do you reckon it's just because you're all around it the whole time, or was there something innate in it?
Well, what's interesting is that my parents didn't really care for it too much. My dad was a Chelsea fan.
Good man.
My family come from Battersea, so it was the local football club. My mum didn't really care for it too much. My granddad, one of my granddads was a Millwall fan, and he quite liked it. But obviously, Millwall were rubbish back then, so he didn't have yeah. Unfortunately, he died just before they got promoted to the top flight, so he missed that. That's quite sad. But my other granddad didn't like football at all, so I wasn't really surrounded by big football fans, and I think that. I don't know. It was just a mystique about it. There was everyone in the playground used to play football. It was the national sport. We had moved at that time and lived right next to Selhurst Park. So Crystal Palace were the local team. You used to see all the fans go there. You hear the roar. There was just that kind of thing about it. And bear in mind that football was nothing like it is now. There was no live games back then, or very rare. You'd have the FA Cup final and the League Cup final and whatnot on the TV. So it really was, you'd get your Sunday or your Saturday fix from Match of the Day, or the Big Match, I think was the other one. And that was it. So I think it was just an inbred thing that I just something I picked up on and really liked, really loved the whole thing about it.
Yeah, definitely. So let's chop and change like my kind of interviewing style is, and let's come back to your strength training and kind of strength and conditioning training. So I remember, or I just about remember, after quite a few Pinot Noirs talking to you before, about you saying you went through a few different coaches, and you went to the States and kind of trained over there for a while. So can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, I've kind of always prided myself on being an individual and doing things that I think feel right to me. I don't necessarily like to follow a well-beaten path where everyone does, because I'm looking for something different. I'm looking for an edge. I'm looking for something that sets me apart, that gives me, like as a footballer, as an ex-athlete, you're looking for that edge over an opponent. I've always been like that. And I don't do it with any malice in mind. I'm just trying to be the best I can be at whatever it is I choose to be. So over the years, the best strength and conditioning coaches I've come across have come out of, they used to come out of the Eastern Bloc, but you never could get out there. And so, it's the writings of people like Louis Simmons out of Westside Barbell that had a big influence. And then latterly the work of Joe DeFranco, who kind of has taken that Westside stuff on. And then working with people like Zach Enish, being influenced heavily by Jason Ferrugia, and all people like this that really are deep thinkers in the realm of strength and conditioning, and are trying to just help kids and individuals become much more functional, first of all, much stronger, much more explosive, but much better people as well. And that's kind of the basis of how I built my business. It wasn't just a training business. We were developing, especially when we worked with younger athletes, we were developing men or, women to make themselves better individually at whatever they choose to be, whether it's if they go on to great things in athletics, or if they go into business, or if they just go into jobs, just be more rounded human beings. And that was what kind of drove me at the start, and still does today, to be fair.
So what are the character traits that you tried to instill in people at that point then?
That they have to do the work. that no one gives you anything really unless you prove yourself. And I can give you a great story about, I had a conversation with a kid who used to come to one of my strength camps I ran, and he was talking to me about my days when I used to go to the gym when I was very young. And I wasn't blessed with super rich parents at all. And I had to, my dad worked really hard to enable me to do my football and to take me to the games and everything like that. But at some point I had to go and get a paper round or do some odd jobs to earn a bit more money to enable me to go and train at the gym. And so my dad got me a job at the vets, cleaning the crap out of the pigeon loft.
Nice.
Be a pigeon racer. So I used to go there after school, and he would pay me £2 a time to clean all the shit up off the floor and off the perches. Right? And I was telling this kid this story about the only way I could get into the gym was to do this. Right? And the kid was like, I would never do that.
Mm.
And, you have a conversation, well, that's probably why you'll never be a top athlete then. If that's your attitude and you're not prepared to do the work necessary, there's a life lesson in that, mate.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I love about training, the parallels. And
absolutely.
It applies specifically in jiu-jitsu that I've just started
okay, cool.
Complete love with, just like the kind of the mindset side behind it, and the trying to go one way and then having to go the other way. And there's just so many different aspects to it. I think it's definitely something you can draw parallels in.
Yeah, Bruce Lee was very big in that. So Bruce Lee used his training and his philosophy were all entwined together, so that what he did in the dojo, what he did in his fighting, what he did in his later days was all entwined about that. It's all life. Everything, it's all a microcosm of this whole big universal thing called life, and how you turn up and do everything in all your areas of your life defines who you are and who you become.
Yeah.
As a man, as he would say.
Yeah, it's the small things that make you who you are, the things you don't want to do.
Absolutely.
And I'm a massive proponent of that. So when it comes to the actual physical side of strength training, this is quite a vague and big question, so take it where you want it, but what are your kind of thoughts on strength training?
I think there's two sides of strength training these days. I think what's happened is the UK, in a bid to catch up really quickly with the rest of the world, have kind of missed certain fundamentals. And I think what happens a lot, and I see this especially in things like football and cricket, is that clubs will only entertain a certain type of strength coach, one who's come through university, who's probably done a strength and conditioning degree, or has gone to something like through the Strength and Conditioning UK Association, qualifying. They will only take them on board, and they won't pay them very much. So what that means is you have guys going in there who probably haven't done the grunt work necessary before. They haven't been under a heavy barbell for years.
Yeah.
They haven't been in high-level sport for many years. They don't understand the nuances of it so well. They kind of understand the theory, but when you actually get in front of a human being, especially a high-level athlete in a particular sport, it becomes a whole different ballgame. And I think that is missing slightly. So that's one side. Then you have the other side, which is let's call it older school strength and conditioning, which is about getting strong and getting explosive. And there are right and wrong ways to do that. For me, you want to look at the individual athlete, and then you need to do that needs analysis thing where you're looking at, okay, what do they need to do in their sport? What's specific to them? What happens in their sport? What needs to be addressed? Where are they at in relation to that sport? Where are the gaps, and how long have we got? I mean, if you look at footballers, for instance, you cannot put Harry Kane on a strength and conditioning program for 9 months of the year because he's got to play twice a week. He'll just be beaten up. So you have to take all this into account. And I think that the strength and conditioning is made to fit into that rather than is given the proper direction to just go and make these guys much better athletes.
Yeah, I almost feel like delaying people's careers in some way would be beneficial, just to kind of give them that. Obviously, they wouldn't get as much game time at a high level straight away, but the physical foundation, like you look at the difference between, for example, Cristiano Ronaldo and Wayne Rooney in physique and their kind of capacity. it's just it speaks volumes, I think.
It does, and I think what's important is that the younger kids coming through in all the sports get much better strength and conditioning work. Now that doesn't necessarily mean they're under barbells doing Olympic snatches or whatever, but they get foundation in all those movement patterns. So they're hinging, they're squatting, they're pushing, they're pulling, they're rotating, they're carrying. They're getting strong. They're getting that old school farm boy strength, so that no matter where they go, what they do in sport, they're strong, they're resistant to injury, they haven't got many muscular imbalances, that the intensity level is correct for them. I know that Arsenal, for instance, have a lot of soft tissue injuries. It's been well reported in the media that. I'm told that one of the reasons is that their training is quite low intensity. Yeah. So to recover the players, and I can understand that. The problem is football, especially British football, Premier League football, is high intensity. So these players train all week at a low intensity, go into a game, it's high intensity, muscle issue.
Yeah.
Now, there's obviously going to be more to it than that, but that's just an example of where the imbalance is between the thinking of one thing and the actuality of the other.
Yeah, I think, sorry to get on a complete rant here, but
don't go for it.
I saw, obviously watching Chelsea as much as I can, and looking to our Facebook thing, and it must have been 2-3 years ago. I was watching them warm up, and I think they were playing against PSG. It was in Paris, and I saw Didier Drogba squatting, and valgus collapse, knees coming in, and I just think this is someone who's at the top of his professional career, and his movement pattern isn't quite right. And I just thought, if that could just be him, it could have been something that I picked up then. But if that's something that's allowed to kind of be commonplace, then that kind of movement pattern is just leaving yourself so vulnerable to injury.
The problem with football, and football is kind of, there's so much money in the game these days that football is kind of separate to the real world, right? But they're still athletes. The clubs will tell you they're not. They're footballers, but they're athletes. They still perform acceleration, deceleration, change of impact, and all that sort of thing. So what happens is it comes from the continual change of backroom staff. So if a manager gets the sack, usually all the backroom staff get the sack. A new manager comes in, brings in these new staff. They have new methods. There's an adaptation period for the players. Some managers will come in today and still won't have players in the gym. They won't believe in weight training or strength and conditioning. They are led down the path by the sports scientists who work on stats and everything like that. The results go bad, they go, the next one comes in.
Yeah.
There's no continuity there. There can be no continuity because the average lifespan of a manager is 18 months. So you can go in and you can give them the best advice possible. You can give them the best foundation to set up in their system. And then in 18 months, it's all thrown out and gone. Now, I know a strength and conditioning coach in the UK, a very good strength and conditioning coach called Phil Richards, who worked at, I think it was Worcester Rugby. And he took them on, he was one of the first rugby strength and conditioning coaches. And he was telling me that he went in there, did all his thing, and made them strong, physical, aggressive, everything you want in a rugby player. And they actually went the whole season unbeaten and got promoted to the rugby premiership. He then went somewhere else, and he was told that the next lot in binned all the strength and conditioning stuff he had recommended they get because they wanted to do something differently. And then lo and behold, they got relegated. So, it is kind of this thing that's going on behind the scenes at every level and every sport across the board.
If you had a kind of a blank canvas of an athlete right now, let's just take football because it'd be a bit kind of relevant. What would you get them doing? Say that they weren't quite, probably, let's say 17, 18 years old. What would be your priorities there?
Firstly, I'd want to get them a bit earlier if I could. But if I got them at 17 and 18, I'd want to know, first of all, what there are a few things I want to know before I'd even start. I'd want to know what their lifestyle's like. I want to know what their health's like. I want to know what their stress levels are like. I want to know what their relationships are like. I want all that stuff away from the sport because that plays a big, big part in things like recovery, in stress management, in their mindset and mentality. And it tells you what kind of person you've got in front of you. Some athletes you can really push. Some athletes you can talk to differently than other athletes. Some you need to pull back a little bit. So you need to know all that stuff. I then need to know what their injury history was, what position they play in, what the club think of him as a person, as an athlete, as a footballer, and all that stuff. Then we'd have to look at their movement patterns. We'd have to see how strong they are. We'd have to see whether there are any imbalances there. And we'd have to see, what the club want from that player going forward. Do they want him to be faster? Do they want him to be more aggressive? Do they want him to be more explosive? So there's all that behind the scenes stuff that we'd have to do way before we even think about touching away. Now, for me, athletes have to earn the right to lift weight.
Nice.
So what I tend to get them to do is I tend to get in and tend to work on movement patterns first. So movement patterns might be, okay, we're going to start with a box jump just to get that hinge going and get you nice and aggressive. We're going to start with some sprints. We're going to start with some pull-ups and some press-ups and some inverted rows and some throws with med balls and all that stuff. We're going to get you carrying stuff. I want to see how you perform under fatigue and load. And then we'll start adding in the more traditional type stuff. Okay, so for the hinge, we might replace it with a deadlift, and we'll teach you how to do the deadlift first. So we'll get the technique nailed. You're not going to worry about the weight. We're going to work on the technical aspects of it. And we'll work that through all the movement patterns. And then we'll just structure the workout dependent on the load that's necessary for the amount of time we have the athlete for. If he's playing one game a week, we don't want him to go sore too much and not be able to perform. So his heavy day might be done the day after he plays his game. So he might play the game on a Saturday, and the Sunday we get in and we do the hard, heavy session because he's got a whole week to recover, and it works almost as well as a deload day.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we'll taper it down or whatever for the rest of the week. So it depends on the position as well. Goalkeeper would just slightly different than outfield player because the goalkeeper works a lot more explosively, short, sharp stuff, up, down, a lot more impact. A box-to-box midfielder will look at slightly differently as well. A centre forward, they don't tend to run too much, although in the modern game, everyone seems to defend now, except probably Mahrez from Leicester, who doesn't do anything until the ball comes to his. He destroyed Chelsea last year. I've got to get it on.
So something I'm curious about is movement patterns. I think it's massively underestimated. And everyone seems to have their unique way of teaching squats, deadlifts, overhead presses.
Okay.
So do you have a particular technique that you follow to teach a deadlift?
So a deadlift is a hinge pattern. Okay, so it's a hip dominant movement. So first of all, I want to find out, can they hinge? Because if you ask someone to bend over, the chances are they round their back and flex from the lumbar spine rather than creasing at the hips. We sit down mostly in our day-to-day lives. Right? Sitting down is catastrophic for those muscles around hip. It shortens and tightens your hip flexors, which means it pulls your pelvis into a rotation that's not going to help in any way, shape or form with your posture or your movement or anything like that, or your athleticism. So we have to look at that. Can they actually hinge, first of all? Right? If they have no experience of doing a deadlift or anything like that, we'll start with stuff like just a hinge and a jump. We're just hinging, pushing the bum back and exploding through. Then we might start doing things like putting a kettlebell or an upturned dumbbell on the floor and getting them to hinge and pick that up. And just working from there and just making sure that we ingrain good technique, that we teach them how to hold a neutral spinal alignment. We get the head in alignment as well, that everything really is set for just pulling that weight off the floor. And then what we'll do is we'll normally put them in a rack with an empty barbell, and we'll start pulling the barbell off the rack at the correct height, sort of a bumper plate height. And then we'll just start putting the weights on and go from there.
Nice.
And some get it in a week, some it takes 6 months.
Yeah. The struggle of teaching people movement.
The struggle of teaching people. But for me, it's so important. And, I train in many different gyms, commercial gyms these days, because at the moment I don't have my own facility. And I can tell you from today, I took a client into one today and we were working on movement patterns. That's exactly what we were doing. And we were watching in the time that we warmed up and the warm-ups we use are relatable to what's going on that day. right? So today was a kind of a more lighter day, for instance, and we were just like opening them up, getting the blood going through. So a deload day more than anything like that. So we do a lot of band work, a lot of activity work to get him fresh and ready to go today. So a hard week's training. In that time, we did about 15 minutes of this. There were about a dozen or so, maybe 10 people who came in the gym. Not one of them, including those that went to trainers, were warmed up. They were straight into exercises. And I could hear people saying, right, today we're going to do chin-ups. Today we're going to do incline dumbbell press, right? So they're thinking exercise, right? They're thinking exercise. What we need to start thinking about, we need to roll it back and think movement pattern. Because we are creatures, human beings, who live and die by the patterns of which we move in. The more efficient we are, the better we are at producing movement, and the less likely we are to get injured or have accidents or, go through things like osteoporosis as we get older and stuff like that. It's very, very important that we as a species are active, are loaded and are moving in correct ways. We do things that aren't very good for us. Sit down, sit on computers with those hunched shoulders, get a lot of internal rotation, a lot of tight pec muscles. We need to overcome that by good movement patterns and good quality mobility work.
Oh, couldn't have said it better myself. That's perfectly said. So at what point did, again, to take a complete left turn, when did you kind of recognize that mindset was going to become such a big part in your life?
Because when I was running my gym business, I got to a level and didn't seem to be able to beat it. I got to a level of work financially. I got to a level of work with the amount of clients I had, the amount of members I had in the gym, how big the business got, what I was trying to do. I kept hitting the ceiling. And I'm going to give a lot of credit to our friend, Mr. Brian Grasso, who I know you had on a previous podcast. I have known Brian for a long time because he used to run the International Youth Conditioning Association. And I knew he was running that when I was doing my stuff with young athletes in the UK. So we kind of kept an eye on one another and I knew what he was doing there. And then he kind of disappeared about 5 years ago and came back, or reinvented himself, if you like, although, to be fair, he was doing it all the time anyway, with his mindset programs. And his constant videos and content about the importance of having a good quality mindset and how we limit ourselves and how allowing ourselves to release from those limits of the things that take us through these self-imposed restrictions and self-imposed limits. And so it was about 4 years ago that I started seeing this and started reading myself and starting to get into the notion that there's obviously something I'm doing that's stopping me do this. Nothing else. No one else is doing it. It's me. And I wanted to deliver more value to the clients I was serving. Clients were coming to me more beat up, more dysfunctional, more unhealthy and more overweight than ever before. And this was happening on a regular basis. And I was thinking to myself, well, why is this so? All the information is out there. You can do a Google search and get any information you want. So why is this happening? And a lot of the time it was the person themselves, not taking responsibility, taking shortcuts, time is getting more tight, and then thinking, well, if I just go and see Paul or I go and see any trainer, I'm just going to get in shape in 2 or 3 months. And it just wasn't happening. And so I started investigating that, and it led me to working with Brian on some of his mindset programs, and now working alongside Brian, helping him deliver his mindset programs.
Nice. What was the biggest aha moment that that made you think, oh shit, I've been doing it all wrong?
That it was completely my fault.
Okay.
That everything that was happening in my life was a story. I had a perception of that story, and I would blame external events, people or things for the things that were going on in my life, when quite clearly it was down to me.
Yeah.
And that was a very sobering moment when I discovered actually it's been me all along. Yeah. So those times when it went really, really well and I took credit for it, great. Those times when it went really, really badly and I didn't take credit for it, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So using Brian and Carrie's kind of terminology, would you describe yourself then at that point? Would you describe yourself as the explicit model?
I would be. I would bounce between explicit and in spirit quite a lot in different areas of my life. When you put a client in front of me in the gym, and I was there. You sit me in front of the computer trying to work out how to get more clients into the gym, and I would start to procrastinate. I would start to overthink. I would start to find other things to do. I would suddenly invent phone calls I had to make, or I would have to go and check on the trainers working in the gym and make sure that all the programs were all written and stuff like that. So it's fair to say that I've probably been through most of those four models at some point in the past.
Yeah, I think we all have at certain points. I think we've all fluctuated between them, and I think that's the key there. But just recognizing it, and I think that.
I was going to say, I think that's the key word. They're recognizing it. I think when you accept that, these things exist and that you have total control over it, and then you go out your way to learn and implement, you get a degree of awareness. And that awareness is always there running in the background as a check. And you notice yourself picking up on things, you notice things going on, and you can say, okay, that now in the past, I would have led me down this road, and I would have led me to 3 days of sitting there bashing my head on a laptop. Now I can pull it back, and I can actually say, okay, now we're going to do this.
Yeah, becoming the watcher. I think that's it. Just observing.
Observation. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's really key. So to give you a chance to answer a random question, is there something that you believe that others find controversial?
That Chelsea are actually the greatest football team ever? Possibly. No, I don't.
I'm always worried at this point someone's going to just come up with the worst racist thing that anyone could ever say.
Time and reality really fascinate me. Quantum physics really gets to me.
Oh, awesome!
Because I find it unbelievable, and yet the more I go into it, first of all, the more I can't understand it, and the more I find it completely unbelievable. And I actually think that this thing we see in front of us, this reality, just doesn't really exist.
Okay.
I actually think, right, here's my theory, okay, that when the universe was created and there was that Big Bang, I think everything that ever existed in time and space happened in the blink of an eye, and that it doesn't exist now. So what happens is that we have an experience borne out by our definition of space and time, but in fact, it's already happened.
Okay. Why do you think that? Where did that come from?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea. It's just some of the crazy things I think about when I'm sitting down.
No, I'm exactly the same. I get fascinated by those things.
Because everyone talks about the Big Bang, universe expands, and it continues to expand. But I just think, well, what happened if it all happened and that's it? Bang, gone, done.
God,
and then what happens in that blink of an eye, in that millionth of a second, everything that ever was happened.
You've blown my mind in the middle of the podcast now. This isn't good for my head. What resources were you reading to kind of get to that point, or following, or is there anything in particular that kind of set you down that path?
Well, do you know what set me on that path? That's a really good question. I've always, one of the best subjects I was good at school was physics. So I always had an affinity for that. So I enjoyed that. And it's something that I just kept an eye on. And, I was a big Star Wars fan as a kid. And, I always had this thing for sci-fi and that kind of thing. So if I want to read a throwaway book, it was usually a science book of some sort, a space exploration book or something about another planet or thing. And it just went from there. And it really was things like when quantum physics got sexy 10, 12 years ago. And I started reading some of those books and some of them are just mind blowing. I mean, I'm not saying I understand it in any way, shape or form, but when you read about things like the observer effect, when everything exists or it doesn't exist, and when it's observed, it changes, and it changes to what we expect it to change to. I mean, that's just crazy. So if you fan that out, And you're talking about the subatomic level. Well, the subatomic level is the same as the universe at large. So if it happens there, it has to happen in everyday life. So this thing we create our experience has to be true.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I started down that path. And I have this idea at the back of my head that at some point I'm going to do a degree or a PhD in it and crack on with that. So it's something I've got to get going on, really.
That's something I could talk about all day, or just listen to all day. I regularly piss my girlfriend off by just going, "What even is this, though?"
You get the hump. People just leave you. They can sit in a coffee shop talking to a group of people, and eventually you're there on your own. Oh, I was talking about electrons.
Okay, so to bring this back on course, what's a book that you've gifted most to people?
The Go-Giver.
Okay.
By Bob Berg.
And what's that about?
It's about it's about sales, but it's about building relationships. Okay. It's about, instead of grinding and hustling and going after it, that you actually allow it to come to you, and you do that by being absolutely, totally present with the person you're with and giving everything you can give to them. And it's done as a parable, and it's one of the best books I've read on that particular subject for a long, long time. And I like it so much I give it out all the time. In fact, I gave one out today.
Oh, great. That's just how to create relationships with people as well. I think people get very confused with sales.
Yeah. I don't have any real sales teaching behind me. But because I'm really good at building relationships, because I'm really, really good at building a community and a tribe, which is what I did in all my gyms over the years. It really does boil down to that people will go out their way to help you in any way they can if you just engage with them, if you're just present with them, and if you just really, give a fuck about the person in front of you. So many times we say to people, "Hey, how you doing?" And if they say, "Well, not too good today," we're like, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. I've got to go." That's not being present. Present is being invested in the person in front of you, where everything else melts away and you are just together. Right? It doesn't matter what's going on around you. That all that's important is that person and the energy they're bringing to that conversation. And what I learned a long, long time ago is that if you give of yourself freely, then that person will remember that. It will make an effect on that person. And if they can help you in any way, they surely will.
Nice. Okay, let's go for daily routines. Do you do anything on a daily basis? I'm pretty much 100% sure you follow some daily routines of some sort.
Daily routine. So I get up usually around about 6:30, and then it's usually hot water and lemon and sit on the balcony and write in a journal. And that can be anything that kind of crops up. It can be I'm grateful for whatever, or it can be thoughts on quantum physics, or it can just be a training program that's been in the back of my mind. I have no structure for that. I just like to write. Then I usually have a breakfast. It's normally a light breakfast, or if I'm practicing intermittent fasting, which I do from time to time, it will just be the water, and that will be it. I usually go to the gym around about 8:30. So I'll train 3 days a week doing strength work. 1 day a week I'll do a steady state cardio where I'll go for a long walk. And then 1 day a week will be a high intensity interval session. So that's 5 days a week. So it gets me at the house, and it gets me in the gym. And then what I'll do is I'll eat breakfast usually after that. And that's when I'm focused. I'll sit down at my desk in my office. I get the laptop on, then I'll start my work. And I normally work in 90-minute blasts. So I'll focus on a particular task. The night before, I will have prepped exactly what my tasks are for that day. And I'll open my diary with the tasks there. I'll sit down, number one, bang, 90 minutes, let's go. And if I do that focus for 90 minutes, I'll get most of that task done, if not all of it. Then I'll go and stretch and roll out. Then I'll come back and do the next 90 minutes. That usually takes me to around about 4 o'clock when I pick the kids up from school. Then it's homework time and feeding the kids and so on and so forth. And I may do another blast of work after that, or I may just go for a walk, take the dogs out, etc., etc. And that's pretty much it.
That's a can of worms there. Let's start off with intermittent fasting. What made you start that, and what benefits have you seen from it?
Okay. I read The Warrior Diet by Ori Hofmeckler years ago. And Ori is a bit of a Renaissance man and well versed in endocrinology and all sorts of things, human biology and such like. And he espouses the benefits of some sort of fast every day for the human, for the average human. So here's the thing. We need to give our digestive system a bit of a break. Constantly digesting food all day, if you eat often, depletes your natural bacteria that form the disease resist, etc. That having some sort of gap in your eating is much more beneficial than eating constantly. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have periods when you eat, but what it does mean that there should be some periods for some people where you go longer without eating food. Now, I'm pretty much convinced that as you get older, your natural caloric level should come down. The amount of food you eat should drop slightly. And the gap that you have between meals should increase to enable your body to replenish itself. The theory behind intermittent fasting is that, let's say you have your last meal at 8 o'clock at night, you then go to bed at night, you get up, say 8 in the morning, that's 12 hours you've gone without eating. If you went another 4 hours, say to 12 o'clock, that's, 16 hours without food. Okay, that's a long gap without food.
Yeah.
Then you break that fast and then you'll eat very small meals a couple of times. So maybe just little green meals with a little, very small bit of protein. And then you have one big non-restrictive meal late at night where you eat all your calories. Okay. That has been proven in science to have really good benefits for certain people. Now, here's the thing with all this health and wellness stuff, that it very, very much depends on the individual. So when you get a diet book, it's a generic diet book, and it will work for some, but it won't work for the majority. And it may work for some, but a week later it won't be working so well because their physiology will change and their mindset will change and what's going on in their lives will change. Their stress levels will go up. So it really is, in all this stuff, is a one-size-fits-one process. So you have to get really, really good at either hiring a top flight coach who knows what they're doing and can be with you all the time to see these changes and put into effect something different, or you have to get really, really good at learning to listen to your body.
Yeah.
So, for instance, for the longest time, I was a huge meat eater, a real carnivore. Right? Now, I'm pretty much one meat meal a day. Okay. The rest is vegetarian. So when I eat at night, I probably eat more meat, and then the rest of the time it's usually more vegetarian. But if I feel like more meat during the day, I'll take it. If I don't, I don't. But it really does boil down to listening to your body.
Oh, I was just about to say that. I think so many people are completely out of tune with what's going in your body, what's going on in your body. Sorry, I think it's Brian McKenzie was a big kind of, when I interviewed him, talking about just to come back to the feel and like an understanding, and the one biggest common theme he found between whether someone would perform well was not heart rate variability, was not like oxygen levels, there was nothing like that. It was feeling, like a very subjective measure.
Tom, look, all this science stuff is great. Don't get me wrong, I love science. We spoke about my love for quantum physics and all things like that. I love science. But, actually being in the trenches and seeing how people are actually working and what's going on with them has always worked in the gym.
Yeah.
Right? It's always worked. And sometimes we can rely too much on the new stuff coming out. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that some of it isn't valuable. Sometimes when we're doing work with athletes, we'll use a heart rate monitor for recovery. So instead of, waiting a minute or 90 seconds, we'll get them down to 120, 125 beats per minute for their heart rate, and then we'll go again, especially if we're doing conditioning type stuff. All that stuff works. But fundamentally, we used to, if an athlete could talk to you, they went again.
Yeah.
We didn't have to worry about heart rate. How you doing? Yeah, I'm fine. Right, okay, let's go. If they go, how they're doing, and they put their hand up and they're bent double, you kind of think, well, maybe they need a bit more rest, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that we need necessarily to be too much of a slave to science, because what will happen in 2 or 3 years, we'll have new science that supersedes this science. So were we doing it wrong now? It kind of is an ongoing process. And I think that when you're in the trenches with the athletes, you've got a much better sense of what's going on than looking at a computer screen for certain VO2 maxes or variable heart rates or recovery times or anything like that.
I completely agree. And I personally think we're in a very exciting time for what, like, the putting the hybrid of the feel and science together. I think there's stuff coming out, like looking at Wim Hof and Laird Hamilton and stuff like that. They've got some cool shit coming out. Do you know what to come back to the nutrition side of things, do you know what your macro split's like at the moment? Or would you guess?
Tom, I'm 47 years old. I don't really worry about my macro split at the moment.
If you're hazarding a guess,
I could tell you, because I had this conversation with a client the other day, that when I was at my biggest and leanest, I was probably having 50% carbs, 25 or 30% protein, and the rest was fats. Okay. That was when I was at my leanest and most explosive, and that was without. That was probably around about 8% body fat. I've never been super low, and I was strong. I was fast. I was lifting heavy weights. I was recovering well, and I was doing no cardio, which is another thing to look at. That I just got it right for me at that time.
Yeah.
If I ate that now, I'd probably blow up like the Michelin Man. But you know, again, it's a case of I'm listening to my body, and my body was craving carbs. I was lifting heavy weight, so I was depleting all of my muscle glycogen. I was building big muscle, so there was more storage capability there. And you know, I slept a lot, so it was important to, you know, get the carbs in for recovery and melatonin production and all sorts of stuff. So.
Okay. Did you have any role models or mentors or someone that particularly helped you get to where you are now?
My first role model was my cousin I spoke to you about, the powerlifter earlier, because he was a real life Superman. He was a huge guy, about 25 stone, tattooed, rode a Harley and lifted big weights. And I was also a big fan of Muhammad Ali. I was fortunate enough to be allowed to stay up by my dad and watch a few of his later fights, so got all that. Then there were people like, obviously Arnold was a big influence in weightlifting and training and life in general. And you know, throughout the years, there's been people like Jim Rohn, who I was sadly never got to actually work with, but over the years, I've watched a great many of his DVDs and teachings, and had a big impact on me and my philosophy and that kind of thing, and just being a general nice guy. And more training type mentors were Zach Evanish and people like Joe DeFranco, and then to the modern day, people like Brian Grasser and Carrie Campbell have helped me so much over the last 3 years, especially the last year now I'm working with them. Have just been amazing people.
Yeah. There's a whole hive of people there to, like, really good people to follow and to emulate, I think.
Yeah, and I'm a big reader as well, Tom. So you know, I love reading books about people and you know, have read countless biographies over the years, far too many to mention, and I like to think I try and take something out of each of them and help me develop. And you know, we don't always get it right. We still make mistakes today, but we're more aware of them and we're trying to put them right all the time.
If you had to choose one book to take with you for eternity, what would it be?
Oh dear. One book. Do you know, the book I probably read the most in the last 5 or so years is The Power of Intention by Wayne Dyer.
Yeah.
I love that book.
It's an interesting book, definitely. I've read it a few times, or I've listened to it a few times, and it makes so much sense. And then, like, I get caught up, or I think I get distracted by the spirituality in it. But I think there's so much good stuff in it, and it's very interesting.
I think that's a very, very good point. I think that people can look at that and think Wayne Dyer is a bit woo-woo and that sort of thing. Wayne Dyer was a hard-edged businessman.
Yeah.
Don't be mistaken. But he had lots of compassion. He was very spiritual. But to him, spirituality was the journey inside. Yes. It wasn't about being religious. It wasn't about being, all things to all people. It was about actually going on an internal journey. And, he talks in The Power of Intention about just being connected to everything. Being connected to that universal energy that pervades everything. And I think connection is very important. I think we're too separated nowadays. And you look at all the rhetoric that's going around in social media and in news broadcasts across the world. And I think the majority of it is because we're just so separate from people. And I think we could all do, possibly, if that's the case, with just maybe being a bit more woo-woo and being a bit more connected,
So on that note, what's your, or how would you define spirituality, and what does it mean to you?
For me, it's just the journey inside, knowing yourself, knowing that knowing that you're here in time and space, and that you're valuable, you're important, you're loved, and that you're connected to everyone. For me, it's just an internal journey of self-discovery.
Okay. And if you were going to give yourself, your 20-year-old self, so you just had the injury, if you were going to give yourself a piece of advice, what would you tell him?
Don't be a strength coach. Those times when you're influenced by things and people that you don't think are in your best interests, listen to yourself. Okay.
Why did you say that?
Because I think sometimes I've done things that, let me start again. Sometimes I've done things that I've done for the benefit of other people that haven't been done in my truest self, and I haven't been as authentic as I could have been and should have been, and have led me down a path where I wasn't happy, I wasn't serving the people around me, I wasn't truthful to people around me, and I know and knew I shouldn't have done that.
Okay. So I could carry on this conversation for a long time, especially talking about geeky quantum physicsness.
Hey.
But I'm afraid I'm going to have to kind of bring it to a close there. Where can people find out a bit more about you if they want to find out some more?
At the moment, the best place to catch up with me is on social media. You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/pbwebonline, or on Twitter at Paul Webb. And on Instagram, I think I'm Paul B. Webb. So nice. You can find me there.
Paul Webb on Twitter. That's a good handle.
I jumped on Twitter. I never really used it that much, but I jumped on it right when it started and managed to get Paul Webb on it.
I can sell that for a lot of money now, I reckon.
Probably. That's a really good idea.
So thank you so much for jumping on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Tom. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Alpha Movement Podcast. To find show notes, unique downloads, and more information on the Academy, head to alphamovement.co/blog. And if you enjoyed this episode, head over to iTunes and subscribe. And whilst you're there, please leave me a 5-star review. And don't forget, you can follow me, Tom Boxley, on social media all over the place, or you can find more about the Alpha Movement at facebook.com/alphamovementofficial.